Hello, and welcome to the first Heavy Hands of 2022. And just to prove that it is a new year, I almost just said 2021 by accident. That'll be happening to me for the first 4 months of the year at least. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And Phil, the birds are chirping. The weather seems to have taken a turn for the better. Nonetheless, I'm in my robe and slippies, and I am ready to talk about a UFC card for the first time in 4 weeks.
Crazy. Yeah, and I think we've got a card which is essentially one of the ones where you're gonna take it because it's all you've had for 4 weeks.
Yeah. If it was in the middle of a 5-month stretch of nonstop cards, you really would have a hard time, I think, caring about more than one or two of these fights at most. It should have been better. Worth pointing that out. It was supposed to have Muslim Salikhov versus Michel Pereira. It was supposed to have Joaquin Buckley versus Abdul Razak Al Hassan as well.
Wow,
that's a good fight.
That would have been a tremendous I mean, it's been rescheduled, right?
I believe so.
I think they're expecting to reschedule it because that's got to be early front runner for Patrick Wyman.
Yes, absolutely a front runner. And on the subject of the handies, before we get into anything else, I would like to issue 2 belated corrections, and also a thank you to the fans who were willing to wait out my week-long bout with COVID, which is why we ended up having an unexpected week off right there at the end of the year and did not release the 2021 handies until the first week of January.
I mean, hopefully that whetted their appetite in the same way that, like, the absence of the UFC has whetted people's appetite for this particular card.
I think so. People seem to enjoy it, although there was one particularly funny comment where somebody said, "Don't like the metal music, weird and jarring," which I thought was funny because they did not appear to recognize that all of the quote unquote metal music, which I would actually label new metal, was STEM. You know, that band that the Dana White owns all of the members' souls in perpetuity. So I hope some of you were able to pick up on those familiarly terrible sounds and why I included them instead of the usual, Guys and Dolls Oscar music. Okay, so 2 corrections or two addendums, additions to the basically 2 things we overlooked. First of all, on Fight of the Year, we had a long list. Another undercard classic that Phil, you and I really should have thought of was the fantastic fight between John Makdessi and Ignacio Bahamondes, where famously tiny lightweight Makdessi fought a lightweight who literally was not a lightweight. He missed weight. That's how much bigger he was. And really just an absolute cracker firefight. It does, I don't know if it reaches that echelon of true greatness, because there's one big momentum shift in round 1 where Makdessi hurts Bahamondes, and after that point it's mostly just nonstop exchanges, but it's nonstop exchanges between one big tough SOB and one tiny tough master technician. And it is a really great fight. I just rewatched it after someone suggested it in the comments, and we missed that one. We should have included it. The other one, Phil, and this is really this is on you. Why didn't you think of Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler 2 for the Glue Factory? The old bastard had it coming award?
Because the old bastard had it coming. This is. I mean, I did think of it, but it needs to be. The prototypical one is a young athlete backing a old person. And Robbie Lawler is clearly not that at this point.
That's fair. I will point out, as the commenter who raised this issue did, that Nick Diaz saying afterwards, "I had that coming," really meant it should have warranted at least a mention. So I'll call that.
I mean, it had the philosophical
Absolutely.
outcome that you would hope for.
Absolutely. So thank you to our savage and ruthless fans who pointed out those mistakes on our part. We won't do it again, okay? I promise. At the end of 2022, we will remember every single fight from the year when it comes time to compile the Handy's nominees.
Every old fighter who's sent to the glue factory will get their due.
That's right. Now, let's talk about 2021 Handy recipient for Worst KO of the Year, Giga Chikadze, Phil's favorite fighter. He's taking on Calvin Kattar in the main event of this first UFC card of the new year. And, it is what it is. Oh, I guess I should name really quickly what else we're going to talk about. Co-main event, women's flyweight rematch, which you probably would not remember. Caitlin Chukagian is once again fighting Jennifer Maia. We've got Brandon Royval versus Rogerio Bontorin. That's a pretty damn good flyweight fight on the main card. And then down in the prelims, one that I'm particularly interested in, Gabriel Benitez versus one of my favorite up-and-coming, underpowered, crafty technicians, TJ Brown. I think that is a very interesting and not at all easy comeback fight for Benitez after that whooping he took in his last bout. But the main event, Phil, Calvin Kattar, Giga Chikadze. I would very much like if we could be on two philosophical extremes here, where I spend the whole segment explaining why Giga Chikadze is definitely going to win, and you spend the whole time trying to rationalize why that is not in fact the case. But I don't know that it's that clear. In fact, I've had quite a hard time figuring out who has a really keen edge in this matchup. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's a really strange one because on the face of it, you're just like, oh, it's Calvin Kattar against a mobile kicker. He's going to just get kicked to pieces. Then, you can watch Chikadze sort of having some pace issues, or you can watch him just spending entirety of the Barboza fight just circling the fence. Mm-hmm. You can think, ooh, is that going to work that well?
Yeah. Well, then you might, counter that by thinking, is Calvin Kattar at his best coming forward? I think the answer to that would be no. Calvin Kattar is also a taller and longer opponent than Chikadze is used to fighting. And I do think a really big point here is Calvin Kattar has excellent conditioning. Typically, even when he is getting his ass whooped for substantial portions of a fight, he has always had an ability to come on strong in the last few rounds. In fact, having just rewatched his fight with Dan Ige, which I think is kind of a seminal moment in one arc that I want to talk about, which is the possible deterioration of Calvin Kattar's technique and tactics. Dan Ige kind of out-adjusts Calvin Kattar pretty solidly through the middle portions of that fight and just can't keep up the pace. And that's really, I think, the biggest reason why he loses. Of course, Kattar helps with that by working his body a ton and keeping the pressure on really consistently. But Calvin Kattar can just, even a version of Calvin Kattar who seems to be putting way too much mustard on every single punch he throws, can keep doing it for 5 rounds. And there's at least some reason to question whether or not Giga Chikadze can do the same.
Yeah, one of the really weird fights I think on Kattar's resume is Jeremy Stevens' fight. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a lot of where Kattar has kind of been going. Been turning more and more into Jeremy Stevens, be it a slightly more back foot, a slightly more back foot version of Stevens, who's quite defensive and who's much more aggressive and more comfortable coming forward than Kattar is. Mm-hmm. But he has become this guy who plants and plods and swings.
Yep.
And it was such a strange dynamic in that fight, in that for a lot of the early going, it was really Stevens being the crafty guy who was taking what he could get given.
Mm-hmm.
He was working Kattar's legs, he was feinting shots, and Kattar, who was the just the big swinger. And in the end, Kattar is the one who ends up putting Stevens down with a single punch.
Yep.
Elbow, as the case may be, just a single massive strike.
Getting his nose smashed at the exact same moment that he knocks Stevens down.
Yeah. It's such a, because I kind of felt like Stevens was just winning up until then.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I have some thoughts as well, but yeah, go on.
And at least if he wasn't winning, it was like Kattar's success was primarily in big singular moments.
Yeah.
It was like watching someone. It was like watching the two halves of Calvin Kattar kind of fighting each other, and he sort of became Jeremy Stevens, more so than Stevens was, by just being like, "Oh no, I'm the power puncher in this matchup," and it's not necessarily a great thing to be to encounter one of the most nodding punches in the division and then be like, what I can do better than this guy? Sitting down on my shots.
Yep.
Even if it worked.
Yeah, and of course, just before that, Kattar had the exact fight with Zabit Magomedsharipov that Jeremy Stevens did as well.
Exact fight, yes.
Yeah, the exact same shape, the exact same shift of momentum, and really the exact same solution that didn't quite work. So one thing that we've already touched on that I really want to talk about here is, has Calvin Kattar gotten worse, or at least has he gotten more rudimentary, or however you want to say it, like you did? Has he become more of Jeremy Stevens? And I think it's pretty undeniable that he has walked the puncher's path after going many, many years as sort of a frequently boring wrestle boxer. He started finishing people again when he got to the UFC, and it does seem like that has changed the way that he approaches his opponents. He knows once again that he is indeed the Boston finisher, and when push comes to shove, really seems to just lean on his ability to swing massive combinations in the pocket. I think the Stevens fight is an interesting one because I actually think we see something a bit closer to the ideal Calvin Kattar after the first round of that fight.
Yeah, that's true.
The first round literally ends with Kattar running forward after being backed up to the fence and throwing a right hand that misses. And because it's thrown so hard, with such reckless intent, he almost falls over just from the force of his own missed punch. That is not the Calvin Kattar who handled Shane Burgos. And I think this is a particularly interesting one because Stevens and Burgos are kind of the best two parallel opponents on the record. Somebody on Twitter pointed out when I was talking about this that, say, Dan Ige, made Kattar come after him for most of their fight. And so maybe we're just not seeing the best sort of style matchup for Kattar when, of course, Shane Burgos is like an easy target who just kept the pressure on the entire time. That gives Kattar an opportunity to be the smart jabber, outfighter, boxer, puncher that he is at his best. So against Stevens, Kattar's corner did manage to calm him down a bit. That the one note they really hit on in the corner between rounds 1 and 2 was, you're throwing too hard. Take the steam off your punches and work behind your jab. And round 2 comes, and pretty quickly Kattar is doing a little bit more of what he did against Burgos. He's got an opponent who wants to walk him down, who wants to get inside and throw hard punches, and he is he's using his jab the way a jab should be used, which is the thing. Kattar still has a meaningful jab. It's still a threatening weapon. It's long. He's got good timing still, But he tends to, in these last two fights, and it certainly at points against Stevens, definitely against Zabit, he throws it like a power punch. He steps in super hard, overextends, he lands flat on his front foot, and Dan Ige was able to counter him off this jab many times as a result. It is like the jab Luke Rockhold threw against Michael Bisping, that he then swore he'd never throw another jab again. And in round two of Stevens, after the advice from his corner, he comes out, and as against Burgos, he's just throwing it like a jab. He's doubling it and tripling it. He's feinting it. He'll get into the pocket and then use it to exit on an angle. And he's using it more defensively, not just as like a huge straight left that you might run into, but it's just something to annoy you, to get in the way of your vision, to allow him to reset. And he still gets into some wild swinging exchanges. And by the end of that round, when Stevens starts using his own jab and puts the pressure back on Kattar, it ends in a truly like boneheaded, while awesome, truly a boneheaded exchange, where he, again, gets his nose completely rearranged in exchange for an elbow that knocks Stevens down. But there are flashes in that fight of the Kattar that I think is the best Calvin Kattar. And I really don't think that is the guy we tend to see anymore. He doesn't pull and slip to set up counters that much anymore. He mostly just waits for you to walk into his range and then swings. Right hand, left hook, right hand, left uppercut, left hook to the body, whatever. But they're all same time counters that are built on the simple premise of, if you get close to me to punch, I'm going to trade with you. He tends to overthrow on his jab. He did that a lot against both Ige and Holloway. And he's just generally less able to vary the tempo of his punches. And I think that factors into why he seems less subtle as a defensive fighter as well. He throws everything into his punches, and the result is that they're like metronomic. Right, that there's no variation. There's none of that surprising speed change that worked so well against Burgos and against Feely before him. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Every shot as loaded up as the one before it, and I do wonder how that will figure into a fight with Chikadze. I also wonder, Phil, how the hell is Calvin Kattar doing after that fight with Max Holloway? Because that was not only a brutal physical beating where he just got torched for the better part of 5 rounds straight and basically just refused to be knocked out, but also the first time in Calvin Kattar's entire career, really since he has gotten close to anything like his prime, that he's faced someone where he must have come out of that fight thinking, I can't beat this dude. This guy is just better than me. Every other fight, like,
yeah, I mean, arguably you could say, maybe Moicano, like,
and even that one, he has moments late. He's competitive. It's just like you could look at that and say, oh, there's one tactic that really.
Yeah. It's also like, if you're going to be like, I'm the best boxer in the UFC, and then have the I'm the best boxer in the UFC Holloway moment. Yeah. He is making fun of you and looking at other people whilst you're trying to hit him. Yeah. It has to be majorly demoralizing. And so now it's been a year. Almost actually like a year to the day today. Or no, the date of this event, it'll be a year to the day since that Holloway fight. And I gotta wonder if that will cause Kattar to reassess, if he will be physically diminished. I don't know. But let's talk about Chikadze as an opponent. How does all of this figure into a matchup with Chikadze? The simple fact that, like, Kattar being super planted and metronomic in his rhythm just means that he's going to get kicked a bunch.
Yeah.
Obviously the parallel here is as you said, it's the Zabit fight.
Yeah.
He's just mostly vainly chasing after Zabit for the first 2 rounds until Zabit tires himself out. I will say, I think Zabit hits a lot higher pace than Chikadze does.
To his detriment.
Zabit gets tired for a reason, is because he does tons of things in the early going of his fights.
Yeah.
He really hits a pace that he can't keep. Shout out to Schwan Humes.
Mm-hmm.
But Chikadze, to his credit in one way, but perhaps his detriment in another, does not have that kind of like overwhelming pace early. No.
But I'll also say to his credit, while we've seen glimpses of him slowing down, he doesn't really lose the speed and pop in his strikes. His body language will read as more tired. I think the bigger problem with Chikadze, more than pace, although I think that may very well be a factor if we get to rounds 4 and 5, where I definitely trust Kattar to be consistent. I think the problem with Chikadze, and this is at the root of why I think you hate him, I think it also has something to do with his face. I believe you said. Mm-hmm. It's just a sort of animal dislike like I have for Roman Dolidze.
Yep.
Who apparently may be the guy that Cheyenne Velismus is shacking up with. Twitter drama is exploding in the MMA world, Phil. I know you've been keeping up with it very closely.
I'm going to pretend I understood that, and that this is not the Jesse, what the fuck are you talking about memes of heavy hands, and be like, oh, Cheyenne. Ow.
But beyond, his face, which I don't mind. I think Chikadze is a perfectly normal looking man, really. We talked about this when we first had to reckon with Chikadze being good prior to the Barboza fight. And it's that he doesn't have the discipline that you expect from a credentialed lifelong striker. He can do all of the great things. There are times when I look at Chikadze and I'm like, oh, you're a Manny Pacquiao type, where you're maybe not doing everything technically correctly. I wouldn't look at your form and be like, this is how you should throw these punches. But tactically, you're stringing things together in a very sensible way. There are lots of those moments. Like early on, for example, I expect we're going to see Chikadze doing a really good job of countering Kattar's overextended jabs. He's going to slip inside and cross counter the shit out of Calvin Kattar. And he's probably going to add a hook after that and then pivot off to the side. And his feet might get a bit messed up and tangled. He might duck his head and take his eyes off of his opponent. All these things I don't like, but he's going to do it quickly and with purpose. And he's going to connect techniques in the way that good strikers do. But there comes a point in so many Chikadze fights where he just sort of seems to forget to be good at striking. Because he's so fast and so powerful, so dexterous, he's got such great timing, all of these sort of intangible things, he'll just swing big, stupid single punches for long stretches of a fight and telegraph things and headhunt. His fight with Omar Morales, for example. There are moments in that fight where he is really excellently outfighting Morales. He's hitting him with jabs. He's countering him. He's outmaneuvering him, and making Morales follow him around. He's chopping the shit out of Morales' leg. And he forgets about all of that about halfway through the fight. He stops putting combinations together. He starts overthrowing on everything every strike he throws. He completely forgets about the leg that is seriously compromising Morales, should be a really inviting target, and the kind of target, as Dan Hardy points out in the commentary, that should be leading to other openings. At a certain point in many Chikadze fights, he kind of just forgets to connect things. And that's the frustrating thing. It really feels like he could be a tremendously good, consistent fighter, but because he's naturally potent, he limits himself to being kind of just a dangerous mess at times.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether he is like a hyper athlete. I think he is quite athletic. You do get the impression that like he's built his game around the assumption that he is a good deal faster than everyone.
Yeah.
And yeah, he will respond in the right ways if he has to, but other times he'll just be like, "Oh yeah, I'll just be able to like exchange with this guy because I can just punch much faster than him, and I've got, you know, the foot speed to gallop out the way."
Yeah.
But you'll still just get things of like Brandon Davis like chasing him down with a feint left into just a big right hand.
Yep.
And Chikadze will just eat it.
Yep.
Like standing bolt upright, backing away, and just finding yourself thinking like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm. And so it poses problems for him because like he should be able to kick Calvin Kattar apart, but an important part of that Hinata Moicano fight versus Kattar, Moicano didn't forget the things that were working. He didn't get suckered into a brawl. And I think Chikadze can. I think it started to happen versus Barboza. In fact, I think it really did happen, and we were seeing a shift in momentum by the end of the second round of that fight. And Chikadze really just kind of wins it by hurting Barboza and then putting Barboza into the kind of fight he has always lost while being more compromised than he usually is. But,
yeah, I mean, because that's the thing, is that he does have things that really helped him in the Barboza fight. Like, you know, he's just he does have good kick defense. Clearly trained to defend them, and like I said, he's just very, very quick. But perhaps Calvin Kattar doesn't have that. But also, like, Chikadze's better kick defense might not necessarily. Calvin Kattar's kicks aren't a big part of his game. If he's just walking Chikadze down and putting him up against the cage, Chikadze doesn't, unless, you know, Kattar's chin has been broken by Holloway fight. Chikadze won't really have the bailout option of just being able to just finish him when things are going south.
Right.
You know, if he's getting put up against the cage and Kattar's starting to work his body, he's not just going to be able to do the old Jamie Varner jump off the cage with your hand stretched out and knock Barboza out.
Yeah.
Against Kattar, because Kattar is disgustingly durable.
Yeah. Impossibly durable.
Yeah, I mean, it is a much trickier fight than you initially think. Because yeah, you're just like, oh, it's a quick-footed guy who can kick a bunch against Calvin Kattar, particularly late career Calvin Kattar, who's just gonna like doggedly follow him around for a while.
And will not measure the distance, will not do enough to occupy Chikadze. Like, one thing Barboza did really effectively when he started to turn the Chikadze fight around was to jab with Chikadze, was to double and triple his jab to throw Chikadze out of position and drive him back to the fence. I don't know if I trust Kattar to do that. Again, looking at the Stevens fight, which wasn't that long ago, maybe that can be brought out of him, and Kattar can make some adjustments mid-fight when Chikadze has sort of potentially stopped adjusting, or at least making subtle adjustments. Although a point in Kattar's favor, the other thing Barboza did that was really effective, body shots. Because Chikadze does not have great boxing defense to begin with, but he does have good eyes, and he's super quick and has great timing. So if you're throwing big single shots at his head, or overloaded combinations at his head, he can move his head to one slot and then scrabble his feet wildly and get out of there. But he doesn't really seem to know how to defend body punches, which again, were, I think, the pivotal factor in Kattar's fight with Dan Ige. They were a really big part. Also, it being Ige's first 5-round fight, I think we saw later in the Chen Sung Jung fight, he was, I think, much better able to stay calm and pace himself and continue making adjustments late. Against Kattar, he reached a point where he just started trying stupid shit and overthrowing, and like he was clearly getting anxious and tired. But Chikadze may very well do that.
Yeah. I mean, Chikadze has struggled mightily with a very durable plodder in the UFC.
Yeah.
Like, Brandon Davis is a lot worse than Calvin Kattar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that Giga Chikadze beat him.
Yeah. It was a while ago now, granted.
It was a while ago.
And, Chikadze starting to knock people out may have a sort of opposite effect that it had on Kattar, where he actually, isn't so desperate to prove that he can knock people out anymore. Whereas once Kattar found the finish, it's the only thing he ever wanted to do again. So maybe, I don't know. I'd like to say that this is the kind of fight where if you're Giga Chikadze, you have to come into it thinking, I have to be super disciplined and sharp. I have to take the targets that are given to me, which will be many, but especially I have to kick the lead leg. I have to outmaneuver him. I have to counter and then get out of dodge. I have to do the things Dan Ige did while being much quicker on my feet and more powerful than Dan Ige.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inclined to take Giga Chikadze here. Largely because I don't know how Calvin Kattar's doing. And that's the kind of read that could very well prove to be a mistake. Calvin Kattar isn't fighting Max Holloway. He may be really hungry to prove something and turns in a super disciplined performance of his own. Maybe having the best boxer in the UFC moment against Holloway makes him think, you know what, I should get back to my boxing that used to be really, really good and flexible. But I don't know about his durability. I don't know about his psychology after that fight. It has been a year away after a pretty damn consistent schedule since his UFC debut up to that point, which I think really helped him in a lot of those tough fights, just having been in one after the other. And I think Chikadze, while he is frustrating in his decision-making and in his technique at times, the reason it works is that he is particularly fast and powerful, and it helps that he's also very long-limbed. He's got tremendous timing. Again, all of these athlete aspects of striking enable him to get by in moments when he is not, when the connective tissue kind of falls out of his game. So I think if we see Chikadze doing big damage early, I don't think it's impossible that he finishes Kattar, or cripples him. And I think that, that could be enough to sway things, even if stuff gets really hairy for him in the last 2 rounds.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
You're not angry?
I'm going to pick Calvin Kattar because I hate Giga Chikadze.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm not going to be sadness hedging.
I'm going to be vengefully gambiting instead.
So, I mean, one thing you can say for Chikadze is that, he's a winner. That's one of the things that's happened in his UFC career. He hasn't lost any of these fights.
Yeah.
And he's also been, Edson Barboza. Again, we spoke about how, he's lost to that kind of thing before, but for a while.
And never like that.
Cub Swanson still actually looks pretty good against if he's put up against an appropriate level of competition, i.e. not the elite or near elite. Cub Swanson still looks pretty much like Cub Swanson.
Yep.
And Chikadze disposed of him pretty easily. So, as much as I hate him, does belong here.
Yeah. And having so many, whether or not he uses them as diligently as he should, having so many attritive weapons in his own arsenal, body kicks, devastating leg kicks, even high kicks that get blocked and maybe slow the arms down, that I think helps balance the scales in his favor here.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think Keita's durability. I think one of the things Chikadze does is actually he has got these like chasing combinations that he throws.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Which often look terrible.
Which often look terrible, but they got Barboza out of there.
Yep.
But they kind of worked on Barboza because of his tendency to scuffle backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Kattar at the very least does not do that. He can be made to shell up, as Holloway showed, but he doesn't stop just running away.
No.
Which will mean that there'll be a lot more. Chikadze will be exposing himself much more if he just sprints after Kattar in that same kind of way. But yeah, it's more just the thing that like you just haven't seen Chikadze in there with someone like super durable that hits really hard. That's just going to be there for round after round. It's always incredibly dangerous to pick a fight where you're like, I'm almost sure the guy I'm picking is going to lose early. Or it's something that I would barely recommend unless you have an absolutely concrete read on how the fight's going to go. Like it's the classic example of this is Wilkins versus Michael Johnson.
Which fight?
Everyone could just predict exactly how that fight was going to go.
Which fight?
Darren Elkins, Michael Johnson.
Oh yes.
There's the example of like this guy's going to get absolutely smoked early and then just win.
It's almost improbable how predictably it played out.
Yeah.
It
looks exactly like how you would expect.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always super dangerous to pick that. If you're just like, oh, this guy's going to get hurt and compromised early, and then he's going to win. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone listening do all that much, but I'm going to do that this time because fuck Giga Chikadze.
And I do think there's good reasons. Like Kattar has gotten hurt. Dan Ige broke his nose right after the Stevens fight in the second round of their fight. And I was like watching it again. I'm like, oh, that's a bad moment. Kattar just seemed unbothered. He is really, really tough. Typically, again, the Holloway fight's a question mark, but mentally and physically, even if he's not making great adjustments, he will take some modicum of corner advice. He will keep the pressure on if that's what he has to do. And, he may have lost some subtlety, but he's still got great timing on counters. There are plenty of opportunities for him to just whack Chikadze. And we don't really know how Chikadze deals in an MMA fight when somebody's really able to hurt him, especially considering that Calvin Kattar, a super underrated aspect of his game, is that he has great ground and pound. If he gets a knockdown or throws you off balance catching a kick or something, he has that Matt Brown, Anderson Silva style where he will just stand over you and rain down accurate, straight punches from an elevated position. So he stands to be a great finisher or at least a creator of some seriously big moments. If he gets one, it'll probably lead to more.
The other thing that I reckon wouldn't hurt Kattar to go back to some of his wrestling.
Yeah. That would be this is a perfect
I feel like
time.
This is another we haven't mentioned it at all. It's another part of him that just seems to indicate that he's become obsessed with knocking people out.
Yeah.
Any kind of point scoring aspect to his game. He was a good wrestler, and I'm still not 100% convinced that Giga Chikadze is a MMA wrestler in any way.
He's still got great defensive wrestling. Calvin Kattar is pretty much ironclad, but. Yeah, he doesn't really tie up with people of his own initiative anymore. It would be a great time to bring that back. And I wouldn't be shocked if he did.
Particularly if he wants to, occupy, just give Chikadze something to think about when he's up against the cage.
Yeah. Just as a switch up.
So you can, if he's going for body work and takedowns, it will make him all the more likely to be able to land upstairs.
So you heard it here first, folks. Calvin Kattar goes for the first takedown in 5 years and gets knocked out with a flying knee.
Oh, yes. Giga Chikadze cements his position for worst KO of the year again.
I know you argued with it at the time. You wanted it to be Daukals Abdurakhimov, but you have to feel vindicated now, right? Now that you're reminded of how awful Giga Chikadze really is to you.
I still feel guilty for that because I still think it should have been Daukals, but
I played on your
feel
emotions.
like you manipulated me along using my hatred of Giga Chikadze, which is, to be fair, very easy to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, there'll be a Valentina Shevchenko fight at some point. You can get me back for that. Let's take a break. Very long first segment, but I think that is warranted, this being by far the most interesting fight on the card and rightfully in the position of main event. After this, Caitlin Chikagian versus Jennifer Maia 2, Brandon Royval versus Rogerio Bontorin, and Gabriel Benitez versus TJ Brown. Coming up.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
More than one of them?
Of them? What do you mean?
And I don't know how many of you I'm talking to now.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. I just mistakenly left the first segment unmuted while we started recording. Phil had the, I should think, charming experience of talking to two Connor Rebushes at once. Who wouldn't, who wouldn't want that? We're now going to talk about some undercard fights. The co-main event, a rematch between Caitlin Chikagian and Jennifer Maia. I sexistly did not even really suggest this one to talk about. Phil insisted, so I'm going to let Phil take the lead on this fascinating rematch to decide which woman that Valentina Shevchenko already beat will get slightly closer to the top of the pile to get beaten by her again. Take it away, Phil.
I'm going to pick Caitlin Chikagian.
Right to the picks.
Win again.
Yeah?
Because she won the first time.
Uh-huh.
And it is like, I don't know if interesting is the right word to use here, but it's certainly like a thing. There are two powerful, unstructured Brazilian women in this division, like Andrade and Maia. And you might think like Andrade would be the better suited to fight Shevchenko because she is a better striker.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't end up being the case. Andrade got absolutely smoked.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mullered, as I think.
Maia had famously one of the only moments of actual success one of the only rounds of actual success we've seen against Shevchenko in this division.
Yeah.
It just illustrates, I think, the fact that, the key to beating Shevchenko is probably just grappling.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's actually like her style is so focused on being a neutralizing striker that she actually she can leave herself open to even quite mediocre strikers if she's doesn't have the backing of just being able to take down and out wrestle everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of that, the basic thing is that even though Maia did okay-ish against Shevchenko and Andrade got toasted and Andrade destroyed Chikagian, still not going to pick Maia to beat her just because I don't think any of those I don't think anything really translates to a win condition. She's still just going to chase Chikagian around, getting punched a bunch. And, Chikagian's going to attempt to scramble back to her feet and will be like just up on volume. I think it's going to be scrappy, and everyone will have forgotten that they fought already. But yeah, just going to pick Chikadze to win again in almost exactly the same fight.
Yeah, I certainly agree that the MMA math does not work that simply here. Really, the big problem that a fighter like Chikadze will always have with someone like Andrade is that she's hugely physically outmatched. And Jennifer Maia is certainly pretty strong. We saw that against Shevchenko, and at moments against Chikadze when she managed to tie up. But she does not have power. She does not have the dynamism that Andrade has. And that's a problem for Chikadze where it wouldn't be for Shevchenko, because Chikadze also does not have the dynamism. So, if it comes down to, I should, do a Wei Li Zhang and knock this woman out on the way in, she can't do it. But given a pretty rote, predictable striker like Jennifer Maia she really is, I think, John Kavanaugh's case study for why you shouldn't throw 1-2s. She makes a 1-2 look like a pretty uncreative, ineffective combination because she doesn't really know how to. Like, the key to a good 1-2, Phil, you have to be able to work your jab for the 1-2 to work. You can't just think of it as the thing you throw away in order to take that step offline and throw the right hand. You have to be able to threaten the center line. You have to make the jab something to worry about, or at least something to be annoyed by. And Maya's jab...
Otherwise, you're literally just saying...
Yeah, ignore
right
this.
Hand is coming shortly after this.
Yes.
Here it is.
It becomes a
Here's
telegraph.
the letter to let you know.
It becomes a telegraph. Yeah, ignore this. The real thing is coming next. And Chikadze is very good at making those kinds of reads. And one thing I will say about Chikadze that is a serious point in her favor, she does not get bored of winning decisions. She doesn't start to make stupid decisions. When something is working, nor does she become too enamored of a particular technique if it works well. She is a really, really disciplined striker. You could question some of her technique. You could certainly question her physicality, but she will stick to the things that are working and expand on them for 3 rounds straight. And I expect that to work here. She's also again, I don't think Chikadze is a terrible defensive wrestler. The women who have notably out-wrestled her, like Andrade, did Andrade even have any moments? I think she just beat her up on the feet.
I thought she just beat her up, yeah. Just chased her. Didn't she just chase her around and then knock her out with a body shot? Yeah,
I think you're right. Liz Carmouche famously out-wrestled Chikadze for long stretches. She also gave Chikadze one of her only actually dynamic-looking moments in the UFC when she hurt Carmouche with the head kick. But usually just having a basic meat and potatoes takedown threat is not enough. According to stats, we're now just Wikipedia nerds who check stats to figure out fights. Andrade did take Chikadze down twice.
Okay.
She just crashed into her really hard over and over again. And that's just not a thing Maia does. So I tend to agree. All right. On to the flyweights. The male flyweights. Brandon Royval, Rogerio Bontorin. This one's pretty interesting to me. Brandon Royval, tons of momentum and hype. Now, I think pretty thoroughly derailed, but not quite to a point of no return. He's lost 2 in a row, 1 to the current champion and 1 to the current challenger for the champion's title. So it could be worse. Rogerio Bontorin, I think has just sort of marked himself throughout his UFC career as pretty much a tough out for everyone. He's kind of, in my mind, a significantly, but maybe not in the areas that count, less deeply layered Alexandre Pantoja. In that he's maybe not a tremendous wrestler, particularly as a takedown artist, but is very physically strong and can just horse other flyweights off their feet if he needs to. He's certainly a lot less sophisticated and adaptable than Pantoja as a striker, but he also certainly has Pantoja's tendency to knuckle down and swing with people when that seems like the sensible thing to do. He beat Matt Schnell sort of in the way that like Entourage beat Chikagian. He maybe got outstruck and walked into a bunch of jabs and had to deal with this quick technical boxer, but every time he landed, it clearly had more of an impact, and he insisted on continuing to land. He walked through whatever he had to walk through to make those shots count. And most importantly, like Alexandre Pantoja, he is a great back taker and the special kind of flyweight who tends to kill scrambles by getting to dominant positions and locking his opponent in place. And that is a very effective aspect to have in your game in this division, especially against Royval, who, as far as scrambling goes, is kind of the flyweight's flyweight. He is all insane, reckless scrambles. And when Pantoja beat him, it was really just by being a better, more methodical positional grappler. So what do you say?
Yeah, it really does feel like this is a make or break point for Brandon Royval.
Yeah.
Because, as you mentioned, this is the same fight he had the last time, just at a slightly lower level.
And with a lot less cred, I think, behind Bontorin's name.
Yeah, and I think the slightly is significant there, because looking back at Bontorin, he really has had like a very credible run in the UFC.
That's the thing about flyweight. You'd think of it as a shallow division, but I have always said shallow but very choppy. These are rough waters to wade through in this division. You really don't get like soft matchups. So yeah, Bontorin hasn't fought the level of competition that Pantoja has, but it has a lot more to do with name value than actual like fight parity. He has fought tough people and done very well.
Yep. I mean, he beat Magomed Bibilotov, who is the current ACA bantamweight champion. Paulian Paiva has obviously, had his own upset win over what's his face,
Kyler Phillips,
and then he was doing very well against Kai Kara France before he got knocked out, and Kai Kara France has also been doing very well lately. He's a very credible opponent. I mean, the one thing you can say about him that really makes you he really doesn't have compared to Pantoja is that he's not immortally durable.
Yeah, he's pretty damn durable, but he has been knocked out.
Yes,
with a single punch.
It's not Pantoja trading punches with Prime Davis and Figueiredo level.
No.
So yeah, he is definitely on the lower level of on a slightly lesser pedestal than Pantoja is, but also it's one of those ones where you find yourself wondering, is this where Brandon Royval really kind of starts to get into trouble? I mean, is it the fact that his game just doesn't quite work in this division at least at the elite level? Because it's kind of hard to see the Pantoja fight not happening again. In that Bontorin is entirely is just going to be incentivized to throw Royval to the ground and then immediately try and just stop the scrambles dead with a back take.
Yeah.
Don't see why that isn't going to happen. And if it stays on the feet, he's just, again, much like Pantoja, he doesn't have the durability edge. He's just got a distinct power edge in exchanges. And, we've seen against like Matt Schnell that he is willing to just walk noodly guys down.
Yep. Yeah.
It is one I would like to see Royval win this. It does feel like his game has been built on kind of improbability and surprise, and the fact that people aren't. It still is genuinely actually surprising. When I was watching the Pantoja fight, I just found myself thinking, like, yes, maybe there are actually just very few people who can match this guy's pace.
Sure.
Because it was still, even having seen, the Kai Kara-France fights from Royval and so on, shocking the extent to which he was willing to attack every single scramble.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I would genuinely love to see him win this. I think you mentioned before we started recording, he is kind of like, and a bunch of people have said this, he is flyweight's Tony Ferguson.
Mm-hmm.
He seems, little nicer than Tony Ferguson.
Probably
a fair bit nicer. There's less of a sort of edge to his craziness.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I would love to see that kind of insane, just go everywhere, try everything approach work out. But it's the fact that it all comes down to him being able to do everything at every point, and the fact that Bontarine just has one of those games where he might be able to just stop everything dead. Yeah.
If your win condition in a fight relies on you maintaining a pace that literally breaks you down as much as in the best circumstances it breaks the opponent down, you're going to win against the just like perennial tough out, or you're going to lose against the perennial tough outs. Maybe not every time, but it's hard to see a particular edge to creating a finish that that Royval has in this fight. Like crazy striking, like spinning elbows and shit, maybe like some step in knees. But the problem, as it was a problem against Pantoja, like against Kai Kara-France, this was effective even as he was being rocked in half the exchanges, because Kai Kara-France didn't want to close in and engage Royval in grappling. So Royval was frequently able to just keep him on the end of his reach or keep him trading in the pocket, and therefore his crazy unpredictability is effective. Bontarine will always have the option to step in and grab a body lock or grab a leg. And again, they may not be pretty takedowns, but I suspect he can take Royval down because most strong fighters who try are able to do that. And Royval is pathologically inclined to allow takedowns because he loves to scramble. So it's the fact of having that out basically from one aspect of Royval's chaos, and then having in that other phase on the ground, the ability to shut Royval out of his game for extended periods. And then there's also just the fact that, I think Kai Kara-France has this to an extent. I think it's gotten better, as we can see in his fight with Bontarine. The mental durability, more and more tough experiences, let you realize what you're able to survive. And you keep making good decisions even when things are not going your way. Bontarine always has that. Like even in his fight with Magomed Bibulatov, where he gets some good grappling moments in round one, and then Bibulatov kind of seems to overwhelm him on the feet. Not quite in Brandon Royval fashion, but certainly with a degree of like weird, unpredictable kickboxing. And Bontarine doesn't just knuckle down and walk through things as he did against Matt Schnell. He doesn't have that level of physical advantage over Bibulatov. He actually remains like mentally stolid enough to make better striking decisions as the fight goes on. He's getting outstruck. He's not getting to the grappling positions as easily. And he starts, throwing strikes away, building more layers onto his combinations. He starts countering and defending better. He's mentally very tough. And I think that is an essential thing to have as well against a guy like Royval, who thrives on being able to break people with pace and sheer unpredictable chaos. So I am inclined to pick Bontarine here, although I would also like to see Royval win. I don't think it's a terrible matchup for him. It does just feel too much like Pantoja.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I'm still just remembering how the speed and ferocity of the scrambles in that fight.
Yeah.
Is that maybe just like slightly lower level Pantoja is actually enough.
Yeah.
I will take the pessimistic pick, and we'll say, because I've already been optimistic today in picking Kattar to destroy the hideous Chikadze. But I'll take the pessimistic one and say that no, even lower level Pantoja will be enough, just about.
Yeah. Also, this may be one small advantage Bontarine has. I don't think he gets tired as easily as Pantoja does. Pantoja, there was like a critical point midway through his fight with Royval where it's like, is he getting tired from just having to stay on top of all these scrambles?
Yeah, that's true.
And you're like, this may be slipping out of his control, and then he wins the key one that leads to a submission. Bontarine maybe doesn't need that critical submission quite as much as Pantoja. He has, as far as I've seen, been a really consistent 3-round fighter, even in some pretty crazy back and forth fights. So I think he's the smart pick here. And with that, let's take one more break. When we come back, really just one more fight to cover, unless, Phil, for a laugh, you want to talk about Jake Collier, or as he has become known in his heavyweight iteration, Jake Cudlier, who's taking on Chase Sherman. But really we want to talk about Gabriel Benitez versus TJ Brown. I think a sneaker, fascinating fight on the undercard here. After this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back. Our final segment here, and Phil has cruelly decided not to talk about Jake Cudlier, so let's jump right down to the prelims, where a featherweight battle between Gabriel Benitez, old Mowgli himself, and TJ Brown is set to happen. Now, a lot of people will tell you, Phil, TJ Brown has, I think, yet to win a fight in the UFC, because he lost his debut, got choked out. He lost to Danny Chavez, despite coming up with some really good adjustments by the last stages of that bout. And a lot of people thought he did not deserve the win over Kai Kamaka. And it was even one of those fights where I was like, yeah, probably not, but he gets extra credit from me for being the guy who made smarter decisions against the better athlete. That being said, he's really crafty. He is exactly my kind of fighter, where people can just overpower him. They're much quicker than him. But when he works his way into a fight, it is by having good technique and making good tactical decisions. TJ Brown is really sharp when it comes to thinking ahead further into exchanges on the feet, and using layers in exchanges beyond just pouring on volume, which is the kind of layer that most MMA fighters tend towards. TJ Brown can get into range with a jab and then anticipate and slip a follow-up strike. He can use his jab to create range and reset on angles. He can counter. He can lead. He's a good adapter. And those are always the guys that I really like. Benitez, on the other hand, coming off that tough loss to old Billy Quarantillo. I don't know why I always get those guys mixed up.
No, don't worry, I do as well.
I think they just came into the UFC at right around the same time, and they're kind of similar. Coming off that loss to Billy Quarantillo, where Quarantillo looked better than ever, but also Benitez looked pretty damn flat, more than I have ever seen him. Just kind of allowed himself to be pressured, got easily out-wrestled by a guy who's not necessarily known for being an overpowering wrestler. Not at all known for that, in fact. And I think it's a sensible comeback fight for Benitez. The more credentialed, experienced, top-level fighter, but not an easy one because Brown is another one of those underrated tough outs.
Yeah, I do want to maybe correct one thing you said there, which is that you said, a lot of people would say that TJ Brown hasn't won a fight in the UFC, and I'm just going to say, no one would say that, Connor.
Because no one knows who he is.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, fair enough. People don't even know who Kai Kamaka is, and I thought that guy was like a really interesting addition to the roster, and now he's gone.
Yeah, that was a bit of a bullshit cut.
That's a talented guy with potential right there. I don't know why the hell they cut him.
Yeah, I mean, this is another, I think, one of these themes running through the cards. I think this is another one of these fights where it's like, where are you really?
Mm-hmm.
And that I think there's more people who are at risk of dropping down, a level of where we think they are as a competition, in terms of competition, than there are people who are just gonna jump up to the next level. If you get what I mean, I think there's a chance that we're just Brandon Royval is not consistent enough from a physical standpoint to be able to be an elite flyweight.
Yeah.
And there's also there's a chance that Benitez might also be kind of done in his gatekeeper role, because just looking at his fights that he's had, and as you said, he hasn't done that well. Brown should be a soft bounce back. We didn't mention it, but you mentioned it, but we didn't decide to discuss it. But same thing with Jake Collier. I mean, I think he really should thrash Chase Sherman, who kind of looks like he doesn't want to be in the UFC anymore. Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed TJ Brown once you told me to watch his fights. I think he has some similarities with Benitez, to be honest. He's just big, kind of foot slow, but surprisingly thoughtful, boxing and kicks guy, especially when he gets into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he tends to build up to his best moments in a fight. Bit of a slow starter.
Yeah, so the question is, how much do you trust Benitez to be the physical force that he was earlier on in his career at this point? Because I think the main thing is that you can see that Brown is an adjuster, albeit one with some significant flaws.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's only generally thinking about one area of the game, like that fight against Kamaka, for example. He started winning. Once he started winning the striking, he started getting taken down a whole bunch.
Yeah.
But he's also someone who starts slow. And there's I think there is a significant chance that Benitez just beans him with a head kick,
Sure.
which is in fact what Kamaka did at one point in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the main thing is I just don't really know where Benitez is at this point. I think I'll probably still take Benitez. I think it's one of those fights where I think Benitez will be able to get some of his confidence back by landing on by landing on Brown early.
Mm-hmm.
And and Brown isn't going to pressure as insistently as Quarantillo did early.
No,
Might do so later, but by that point, I think Benitez might be back in the game a bit. So we're looking a bit more of a who was the guy who fought the Pons recently? Baeza, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Where it's like think it might be ropey for Benitez early because I don't think he's looking particularly confident or strong. But I think he'll get back into it, and then the fight will even out towards the last part as Brown gets his reads in.
Yeah, of course, this is something to watch out for. It wasn't just Benitez getting pressured early. In fact, the first turning point in the fight with Quarantillo was when he went after Quarantillo. Now, you could say that's a response to some really intense pressure right out the gate. He's trying to back him off, but he goes after Quarantillo and gets dropped on the counter, which was a very surprising thing. Again, Quarantillo, not known to be a suffocating, stifling wrestler, also not known to be like a knockdown counterpuncher. TJ Brown does not have the fast start. He will have to find his solutions as the fight goes on, but once he gets going, pretty damn good counterpuncher, actually. One who, again, I think this was the reason why I was okay with him beating Kamaka. Kamaka was trying to counter, but he was just trying to make naked reads. Like, let's stand in space. I'm going to wait for you to move, or wait for you to start to come forward and then just throw at the same time as you and be faster and more powerful. Brown will create his counter opportunities, uses jabs and feints, anticipating counters and then recounters to, countering with initiative, basically. The problem is, like, he has to do that. The reason he's developed that skill set, I think, is that he can't just make raw reads like a guy like Benitez often can, as he did early on against Sadiq Yusuff, where he was actually the first guy to drop somebody in that fight because he's got super quick hands and is himself a really great counterpuncher. Yeah, I think I'll take Benitez as well. I think he is still going to look significantly faster and sharper. I think it's a fight where he can probably afford to make more mistakes in the early going than he could against Quarantillo, who I may have said all these things about him, like sort of overperforming expectations. But at the very least, Quarantillo is a fighter you can trust to be on right away.
Yep.
And Brown is not. I am still curious to see how this one plays out. Sadiq Yusuff, much more physically imposing, but by just staying mentally tough and sticking to his approach, Benitez has always been, I think one of the main reasons he's a gatekeeper is he's always been one of those fighters who can kind of drift out of the fight as it goes on, who can find some really big moments. That was kind of the problem he had against Omar Morales more recently. When he has lots of success, but Morales is just, as we saw in his fight with Chikadze, incredibly dogged and has a huge ego. And if you do something effective against him, will be driven to get it back. I think Brown has a bit of that as well. So I think it'll be tough down the stretch if Benitez doesn't get TJ Brown out of there. And if you look at the number of knockdowns Brown survived against Kamaka, one of the major reasons he probably should not have won that decision, he's certainly very tough and capable of staying in a fight and continuing to adjust even after getting hurt. So I think it's a good one. I think there's a strong chance for Brown to kind of break through and be Benitez's second loss in a row here. But I'm going to pick Benitez for being super dangerous in the first round, like you.
Yep. I think that's fair.
All right. Well, I think that'll do it for the year's first official episode of Heavy Hands. Let's see what we got coming up on the horizon. Of course, going forward in 2022, we are going to make a concerted effort not to just cover UFC events. We may, God forbid, discuss Bellator at some point. I don't know if I'll ever take ONE FC seriously, but there are certainly some interesting Ryzen events we could be paying attention to, some PFL events perhaps. And I would certainly like to talk a little more about kickboxing and boxing as well. Step right outside the MMA sphere, which we used to do more often in the very early stages of this show. For example, coming up in March, we have an episode that Kyle McLaughlin absolutely has to join us for when we're getting Chocolatito Estrada 3.
Hell yes.
So those are things to look forward to. As for next week, it's probably going to be UFC focused. We've got Ngannou versus Gane. We've got in the co-main event the aforementioned Brandon Moreno. Oh, they're doing Davis and Figueiredo. I thought they were doing Pantoja.
Yeah, why did I let you trick me like that?
I was wrong. You're a racist. You just saw a Brazilian name and were like, yeah, you're right, Connor. At least I wasn't looking at the name on the fucking screen when I made that mistake.
I wasn't looking at the name on the screen. I'm just agreeing with you.
You stick a certain number of vowels next to each other and Phil just can't distinguish between the names. Moreno Figueiredo 3. I would honestly rather see Moreno Pantoja. I'd like Figueiredo to get a comeback fight, but there was still...
Yeah, I'd like to see that Moreno is still like a championship level fighter.
Figueiredo, you mean? Once again.
Figueiredo, yeah. I'd still like to see him prove that he's still a championship level fighter before like I see him back in there again.
Yeah.
That was 100% not an instant rematch performance.
No, that was you probably need some time off and then a comeback type of performance. But on that card, we've also got Movsar Evloev versus Ilya Topuria. I think that's a really interesting featherweight fight. Yeah, plenty of good stuff to talk about here on the undercard as well. Oh, look, Connie Barcelos is fighting another guy that I don't recognize. Great. All of that and more will be coming up on next week's episode. Until then, make sure you find us on Twitter. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. I'm at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And we look forward to another year of not quite so much UFC and more great guest analysts. Going to get Kyle back on. Got to get Schwan back on. Lord knows I want to talk to the sweetest of all sweeties, Ed Gallo, again. And I look forward to having you guys along with us for 2022 in combat sports. Until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.